Everybody, it's Matt. Thanks for hanging out with me on my YouTube channel. In this video, I want to talk about a Star Wars show that I just watched on Disney Plus with my kids. It's called Tales of the Jedi. I didn't even know it was coming. I hadn't seen any trailers or anything, so we just tried it out. It was really good. It's 6 little episodes. They're all kind of short films, 10 to 15 minutes long, focusing on 2 Jedi. More on that in a minute, because I see some of you right now, you're going to tap out because you're like, oh, well, I like the stuff where we talk about the Bible and Jesus and Christianity on here, but I don't really want to talk about Star Wars. No. The reason we're talking about this Star Wars series here is that it accidentally goes into all of this stuff about the values of Jesus, the values of the kingdom of God, stuff that you see in the book of Matthew, stuff that you see in the example of the life of Christ, stuff that you see the Bible saying about Jesus in other parts of the Bible. This is one of those shows that I'm really excited to talk with you about because it's either super sneaky Christian or it is accidentally Christian in terms of its orientation. So I'm going to explain. Even if you're not in the Star Wars thing, I think you're going to be able to track with this, and it's going to be pretty interesting and fun. Well, yeah, I'm biased because I'm making the video, I guess. But here we go. There are 2 main characters that get traced over the course of these 6 little episodes. 3 are dedicated to a character played by Christopher Lee in the Star Wars films named Count Dooku. Count Dooku is a bad guy who used to be a good guy. He was a Jedi who made a bunch of bad decisions and gradually lost his way to a certain pragmatism, and enough bad choices added up to him becoming really a pretty vile character when all was said and done. That's character number 1. Character number 2 is the beloved Ahsoka Tano. If you've been around Star Wars, you definitely know who this is, but if you haven't, you might not know her because she hasn't been in any movies yet. She is a character who was created in the roughly late 2000s, early 2010s animated Clone Wars series. She is the Padawan of Anakin Skywalker, who becomes Darth Vader. And she represents everything a Jedi could be. In my estimation, she is the goodest of good characters in the Star Wars universe. She's not simple. She's not naive. She's not a Mary Sue. She has problems. She has to overcome things. She doesn't always get everything right, but her orientation is toward that which is pure and good and empathetic and caring toward other people. She's an idealist in all the best ways. I love that my daughters look up to her, and she's my favorite Jedi as well. So again, in this Tales of the Jedi series, you're getting 3 little vignettes about the life of Count Dooku and 3 little vignettes about the life of Ahsoka Tano. Each of them traces them over the course of their development in life, and in each of these 2 arcs, you see them subjected to very similar challenges. Both run into situations where they need to overcome something, presumably to do ostensible good. But both of them have the opportunity to take shortcuts, to be a little violent, to forfeit some of the moral high ground, to do some things that probably aren't good for their own character. But if they take those shortcuts, it might help them do something that might help other people, or might be nice, or might accomplish what they conceive to be a positive outcome. And what you see consistently is that Count Dooku's character picks the cheap, fast, shortcut way, which is usually violence. He is willing to use his power however he needs to at the drop of a hat. He walks in his opening vignette to a rundown town where people are beat up. I'm not really going to spoil much of anything. This is just the very intro. And he's clearly there seeking some answers. And he walks into some space bar and he's like, hey, I need answers about this problem. And everybody's like, and they won't help him. So he just delicately pulls out his unlit lightsaber and sets it on the table as if to say, how about now? You can tell me the thing, or I'll use this here lightning death stick to just start whipping out some pain against all of you. And then they're like, okay, fine. Well, if you're that kind of person, here's what you need to know. Well, Ahsoka, by contrast, is confronted with all sorts of opportunities to unleash her power and talent and ability to make people do the things that she wants. But you discover that Ahsoka's agenda is not just get what she wants. It's not even just get the outcomes that would maybe be most good. How she gets there matters. So she's shrewd in that she's great at identifying a situation and thinking through what to do, but she maintains a degree of innocence and purity, and that there are certain lines she's just not willing to cross. Dooku, on the other hand, is also shrewd. He sees situations for what they are. He's maybe even a tiny bit shrewder than Ahsoka, but he is not innocent. He is willing to cross all kinds of moral lines to get the things that he wants and to achieve the outcomes he believes to be good. So what you have here are really two things straight out of the teachings of Jesus that are in contrast. First place that this takes me, and maybe some of you are already catching it, is Matthew 10:16. Matthew 10 is the second big speech around which the book of Matthew is structured. And in Matthew 10, Jesus is sending out his disciples for the first time to go and carry out the mission and tell people about Jesus, and he even gives the power to do miraculous stuff in the style of Jesus. And he sends them out with this message: repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. In the middle of that, he gives them this commissioning, overarching statement that characterizes what they need to be as they go out. He says, "Behold, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves." This is Matthew 10:16. "Therefore, be as shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves." And as we work the rest of the way through the book of Matthew, we discover that doing one or the other really does lead to ruin and does not bring about or exemplify the values of the kingdom that Jesus is describing, that Jesus is championing, that Jesus is living out. So I really like the way the contrast between Dooku and Ahsoka and their decision-making takes us to that shrewd as serpent, innocent as doves thing. Even for somebody who isn't a Christian at all, I still think that's an incredibly helpful principle, and the ideal, surely, is to do good while honoring the process of doing good and all the little decisions that add up to accomplishing the big goal. And the goal then would be not to be an idiot rube who doesn't accomplish anything redemptive or doesn't participate in redemptive things or do justice because you're so focused on your own innocence that you don't even look at the problems around you and problem solve them. But you were good and well behaved the whole time. That's one way to fail. Another way to fail is to just be absolutely ruthless and then do whatever you have to do. Ahsoka is held out in this series, and indeed everywhere she appears in Star Wars, as having a pretty admirable balance between shrewdness and innocence. Dooku is a great example of what happens when you lean too much into the shrewd thing. The imbecilic Jedi Council, who just can't see the evil that is unfolding in front of them in the era of the prequels. I think they're held out in the Star Wars universe as the cautionary tale of what happens when you are terribly innocent and you have all pure, nice, well-behaved meetings with no swears and not breaking any rules, but you can't see what's going on right in front of your face, and because you did nothing to identify that or do something about it, chaos and evil is able to run free. The second thing that this contrast between Dooku's response to power and Ahsoka's response to power brings me to is this whole theme throughout the whole Bible as it pertains to Jesus of his meekness. Now, at the very beginning of Jesus' public life, right off the bat, one of the very first things he describes as being a value of the kingdom, something that's treasured in the kingdom but not in the world, is meekness. Now, meekness, just definitionally, it doesn't mean like weak and shrinking and apologetic and hat in the hand. Meekness means a degree of power restrained in the most literal sense. Now, of course, famously, he says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Nobody's really heard much of anything from Jesus yet. This is the first, one of the opening lines of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. So people were hearing that, and they're like, well, that's just not how the world works. This guy's like, that just isn't how things are. Well, that's the point, is that Jesus is saying that the world is the one that's backwards, and the kingdom, the values of the kingdom, those are the values that everybody really wants, that everybody really knows are right, but the world forces us into this mold and makes us operate the other way. That no, the people who inherit the earth are the ones who throw off any restraint and do whatever it takes to accomplish the ends they want to accomplish in the style of Count Dooku. But it's not just that Jesus says that meekness is an ideal. He lives that out. I'm not trying to like spoil the Bible for you if you're not quite finished with it yet. But it turns out he's God in the flesh, and it turns out that In Matthew 17, we see that he has like the full glory of God and all of this, and he has got access to all this power, and then he lets a bunch of chumps just march him off to a cross and murder him. What? He could have stopped that, but he makes it very clear that he's not laying down his life because someone else is doing it to him. He's laying down his life voluntarily. He predicts, 5, 6 times starting in Matthew 16 throughout the book of Matthew that no, the Son of Man, that's one of the terms he used for himself, is going to be handed over to the religious leaders, the chief priests, the elders, and he's going to be executed and raised back to life on the third day. He knew what he was walking into, and he walked into it anyway. Heck, his disciples were willing to kill people in, Matthew 26? Matthew doesn't name who it was, but we know from the other books in the New Testament that it was Peter who got out a sword and was like, who do you want me to kill to keep you from having to get arrested and go to the cross? And Jesus is like, hey, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Count Dooku, in all 3 of the little vignettes that we see, he is so quick to live by that sword, so quick to pull that thing out. Again, I don't think I'm spoiling anything because it happened in a movie that came out in like 2003, but Dooku died by the sword, and not even somebody else's sword. He died by his own sword. If I remember the way the scene unfolded correctly, I think his own sword was one of the 2 weapons that ended up striking him down. I don't think Jesus was prophesying things about Star Wars right there, but his remarks hold true. Jesus is saying we could go with violence, but that's not the kind of kingdom that I'm building here. In general, what we see is a Jesus with unbelievable power, not just in his earthly life, but even as one who came from his heavenly eternal existence, his glorified existence, and took on flesh at all. What we see is meekness in action. Now, never a lack of shrewdness, his ability to outmaneuver the most clever people of his era, the most educated, most sophisticated, most well-funded people. They never get one up on him. He beats them every single time with so few words. His wit is remarkable. His awareness of what other people are thinking is remarkable. His strategic shrewdness is remarkable. Even when he's on the cross, what does Jesus say? He says a few things while he's on the cross, but one of them is, "It is finished." He did everything that he came to do before being crucified and then allowed himself to be crucified when all the work was done. He said that he didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. That's innocence, and it's also shrewdness, and it's also meekness, all on display. And, yeah, of course, very famously, Paul then later writes about him in Philippians. I'm embarrassing myself with this Bible drill right now. I'm going to go eat popcorn. Philippians 2, Paul is maybe reciting the lyrics to a familiar early Christian hymn here. Maybe it's a poem. We don't know exactly what this is, but it looks like it's in verse. But he's talking about Jesus' attitude. He says, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. And now he's going to go on to explain shrewdness, innocence, and meekness, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore God exalted him, and goes into all of the rest of what happens with the resurrection, and that at his name every knee should bow, every tongue confess. You've probably heard that one before. It's, like I said, a very, very famous passage. Everything about Jesus coming to earth and taking on flesh at all, everything about the stuff that Jesus taught, everything about the values of the kingdom that Jesus is articulating and living out, everything about the way Jesus managed his business in terms of how he interacted with people of indifference, people of goodwill and curiosity, people of not goodwill who were serpents. He always knew who was what and where the playing pieces were and what was going on, so that if he ends up going to the cross, he's going there because he felt like it for some bigger purpose. In this case, as the culminating event of God's redemptive plan, the solution to the problem of sin and death and separation from God that are initiated all the way back at the very beginning of human existence, all the way back at the very beginning of the Bible. So I love it when I watch stories and there's a degree of sophistication behind them, sometimes that happens in a very sophisticated series or book or song where you just marvel at how complex it is and how even difficult it is to digest it all. And you got to take it in little chunks just to keep everything straight. But I also marvel at the quality of writing that it takes to take a simple story. Here's Count Dooku. Here's Ahsoka Tano. And to very quickly and succinctly play out some little events, little vignettes in these characters' lives, and yet communicate timeless truths about ethics and morality, but more importantly, whether accidentally or intentionally, about the nature of Jesus himself, the most important character in all of history, and about what it looks like to be, again, either intentionally or accidentally, an imitator of Christ in terms of how he handled his business and the example he puts forth for people coming after. Look, no matter how far culture goes or the different ebbs and flows or the ways that it drifts, everybody still seems to have the implicit ability to look at the character arcs of two characters like Count Dooku, who makes ugly, abuse of power decisions in the ostensible service of good, and Ahsoka Tano, who chooses to pass on using her power in the service of remaining innocent while still finding more clever, difficult ways to do good. Everybody still seems to have the ability to look at that story and say, this is not a good way to live. The Count Dooku approach is not the ideal, and there's something very admirable that we want to imitate in the Ahsoka Tano approach. And I think these things are self-evident to people who watch a show like this, to anybody who watches a show like this, because these things are the characteristics of God. These things are born out of the character and values of God. And I think that God made everything. And as a result, these moral truths are baked in to everything about existence and humanity. And I loved the show, and I love the way it took me back to things I've been spending a lot of time thinking about over in Matthew. If you are not someone who likes Star Wars, I want to particularly commend you right now for trusting me and hanging out with me, knowing that we would eventually get to stuff that you're into. If you're somebody who does like Star Wars, I hope that was enough Star Wars for you. All right, I'm Matt. Thanks for hanging out with me. Let's do this again soon.